Evening, everyone. In my thinking and praying, I began to think of David, who was anointed by Samuel to be king in Saul's place. But it was going to take a while for him. Although he was anointed king, it took years, didn't it, before he became king. And I've been thinking about the cave of Adullam. Have you ever heard of the cave of Adullam? I'm going to show you the scripture right now. 1 Samuel 22. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered round him, and he became their commander or captain. About 400 men were with him. And I suppose if there was a title to what I'm saying today, it would be, as I put at the top, from the cave to the palace, from the cave to the palace. So there, in this passage, 1 Samuel 22, verse 1 following, we see that David, far from becoming king, became a fugitive. It was the exact opposite to what God had anointed him to become, a fugitive. He wasn't in the palace. When Samuel anointed him, as a young man, and said that you will be king, or I anoint you king, he must have immediately in his mind thought he'd be in palaces, it would be, and here he finds himself in a cave. And his father's household and brothers come down to him, which must have been quite a comfort. But look at his subjects, if I can put it that way. If he's a king, look at his subjects, or those that come to him. You'd have hoped, being king of Israel, that he would have the choicest and most loyal of the soldiers and army to serve him as king. But instead of a palace, he finds himself in a cave. And these are the type of people that came to him, all those who are in distress. Think about that. In distress, what could that mean? These men were in distress. Things hadn't worked out for them. Perhaps they were on the run from the police. Perhaps they came from broken homes. They certainly had nowhere better to go than a cave with David in it. They were in distress. And the second group of people were in debt, running from their debts, running from the law. They were in debt. They weren't wealthy. They weren't prosperous. They owed money. And the third were discontented. They weren't happy. They were grumbling about what was going on in the kingdom, and they weren't happy with the present king, Saul. They weren't happy with the way things were going. They were discontented. And the distressed, the debt-ridden, and the discontented gathered around David in the cave. 400 distressed, in debt, discontented men were with him in the cave. What a bizarre situation for the prophetically anointed king of Israel to be in a cave with a bunch of losers, discontented, unhappy, distressed men, all there gathered to him. And he became their leader, not the leader of the kingdom of Israel, not yet anyway, but he became their commander. They looked to him. And we're going to see that he did such an incredible job with these 400 men that after he had trained them, if I can use the phrase, discipled them, taught them, corrected them, ministered to them, befriended them, they will become what we will see later, as not the discontented men or the distressed men or the in debt men, but they will be known as David's mighty men. David's mighty men. So in this cold, damp cave, this became the place of training and discipline, the place of character formation. In God's plan, it was too soon for David to live in a palace in Zion in Jerusalem. It was too soon. It wasn't God's plan. If it was, he would have been there already. But God had a plan not only to prepare David properly to be the king of Israel, the king that God wanted him to be, but also he wanted David's team also to be well trained, so that when David and his men took Jerusalem, and these men would take Jerusalem with David, and when they found themselves in the palace, and these men found themselves in great positions of authority, that they would be ready to handle rule. They'd be ready to handle wealth. They'd be ready to handle position. But this group right now, and perhaps including David, otherwise why didn't God put him in the palace, weren't ready. And so we find that there's an incredible work of God going on in the cave of Adullam. And the word Adullam means, oops, sorry, just dropped my phone. The word Adullam is often translated as a hideout, but the Hebrew word Adullam really means to take a detour from where you're meant to be, taking a detour. And so this cave of Adullam was a sort of detour in one sense, because they were heading for the palace and for being the greatest fighting men that Israel would ever know. But this detour, although they didn't understand it, it was actually God's main pathway to get them ready for what he was about to do with them. And it's funny because the cave of Adullam has had, and the story of Adullam has had such an impact, not only on Christianity, but politics and Western culture, that in politics, they still would use the term Adullamites from the cave of Adullam. Adullamites. And Adullamites in political language refers to groups of political outsiders who have no power but are plotting their comeback, or in hiding, or have no power, but one day they're going to come back and take power. At least that's what they're doing. The powerless in preparation for power. And you know, this was a difficult time of spiritual formation of these men's character, and David's character being based in Adullam. And David showed them many things. I won't go into all of it, but one of the greatest things that David showed his men was that he trusted the Lord, and he had a respect and honor for King Saul, even though King Saul was a nasty piece of work that God had rejected. So David would not kill King Saul, even though King Saul was put into his hand on a number of occasions. Remember, he got close enough to Saul to cut off a patch from his cloak. And when he did that, even he felt so guilty for doing that. And so there was a forging of relationships in difficult times that would allow them to be blessed in big times. You know, when often there is a pioneer phase in a ministry or a church, these pioneers that maybe grow a church, or maybe it's an evangelistic ministry or a missionary organization, or any of these things. In the early days, they have nothing, they are nothing, nobody knows about them, and they have no success. But normally that group of people that starts the church or grows the church or begins a ministry, normally what happens is, if God puts his hand on that ministry and it suddenly begins to become well-known, successful, prosperous, usually It's those that were there at the beginning when there was nothing that are the core that take that right through, and that the senior leaders can trust. And so you often find in, I remember, I'll use an example. I remember when Pastor Peter, on my first day at work at Emmanuel, put me on a plane with himself, and we went to Trinity Church in Singapore for an incredible conference. And of course, many of you, and especially Pastor Peter, who was trained there, Pastor Peter knows Apostle Naomi Dowdy and many of the core people there. And so when we got there, Peter introduced me to some of the people that were closest to Naomi and were there at the beginning, or near the beginning. They were there when that little Trinity church was struggling, arguing with one another, had a church split, and they were there very close or near before the explosion happened. And it's interesting to see that those that were there at the beginning were still closest. I'm sure some fell away and moved on, but generally speaking, you could see the trusted ones. You could see the ones that had been there in the formation. They'd been there in the cave, if I can put it that way, and they'd grown with it. And because they'd grown with it, they had a different understanding of that mega church. They didn't, not that anybody else did, but they didn't take it for granted. Even the senior minister that followed Naomi, Dominic, he was there from a young man. He understood what it was to grow a church. And so there's that sense that this can work, that God will put teams together at times, and these teams will begin in a cave or in a place of hope and prophecy, but not really seeing the fruit. And then when the fruit comes, those that have bonded together in the cave and in the difficulties and formed one another, and iron sharpening iron, and relationships going through the difficulties and coming out to be formed, strong teams are only formed often in adversity or in a cave-like scenario. But having formed, then when and if God then blesses, it's those that were there in the cave that David would trust, and it's those that really carry the ministry from the cave into its destiny. And then the next danger would be the second generation that didn't know the cave, but enjoyed the palace, or were born in the palace, like Rehoboam and some of David's son, and they never knew the cave. They didn't know what life was like with David in the cave. They'd heard stories, but they'd never experienced cave-like experience. So they thought that the palace was normal. The palace became their cave. They wanted more and more and more. And so often what can happen is that second generation, or especially the third generation, can ruin it all, because they take for granted the palace that those that were in the cave could never take for granted, and steward it with all their might. So here just a couple of Psalms, because there's a couple of Psalms that David wrote in the cave. So I just thought I would share those with you, because it gives a little bit of an insight into what they were going and what it was like during the cave periods. But I've sort of mentioned to you that although they might have been having difficulties, actually they were being formed for greatness. We know the end of the story. They didn't. But look at what they were going through, or David was going through, and yet we know God was preparing him and them, and we'll see later, for greatness and success. Psalm 142, there, a maskil of David. When he was in the cave, a prayer. So here's David praying in the cave. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I'm in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they're too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me because of your goodness to me. So here in this psalm, he is troubled, he's overwhelmed, he's isolated, he feels defeated, he's depressed, he's imprisoned, he still has hope. And he says, then the righteous will gather about me. Well, I wonder if he prayed this before these 400 came. And I wonder what he thought when these 400 came, because they didn't seem very righteous, did they? They were debtors. They'd stolen money and refused to pay it back. They were discontented, grumbling, and in distress. And that's who God sent to David. You know, I think that as well as choice vessels that God has been and is sending to Emmanuel, we've had choice vessels at Emmanuel for decades. God has given us choice vessels. But also we're believing and thinking that we're seeing other choice vessels over the last few years, I don't know, 5, 6 before I came, but also during when I've come, I've noticed choice vessels, you know, coming and wanting to get involved with us. There's about 10 people that want to join the worship service, a worship team, and we'll see how they do, but not just join the worship team, they want to join life groups and they want to be part of the church. One lady, she came for the second time, and she's living next door, and she's a lovely lady. And she said, I used to be in the worship team. I'd love to be in the worship team at Emmanuel. I thought to myself, this is only your second time, and and so I said to her, well, you're welcome to come along when we have the new people and see what they're like. But if this isn't the right church for you, then there's no pressure on anything, because you would need to make Emmanuel your home to serve in that way. And she said, oh, don't worry about that. This is my church. I'm telling you, this is my church. And I thought to myself, wow, what conviction. She meant it as well. Well, we'll see how well she can sing. I've got a feeling she can, but we'll see. But what I'm saying is choice vessels coming, ready to serve. But at the same time, we also have to be aware that some of the mighty men and women that will be formed amongst us to take Emmanuel into the future won't always be ready-made, if I can put it that way, choice vessels, ready to step into service straight away, having been formed and honed and trained at other churches that they've been to, across the world, and God has sort of just transferred them by his will to work in our vineyard. Some of them are going to be distressed. Some of them are going to be in debt to many things, not just financially, but all over the place. Bankrupt of soul, bankrupt in mind, bankrupt in experience, down and out in life. Others are going to be really discontented. I got this feeling, I'm not saying it's prophecy, but I got this feeling that God perhaps may bring to us or help us reach out to, taking John's prophecy seriously earlier, coming, but also reaching out to, that we're going to get people, God's going to bring us distressed people, all right? Not just people that aren't saved, or we're going to find them, whichever way, both ways, that they're going to be distressed. And sorry, I put that on too long. Sorry. They're going to be, what's the word? Discontented, like these men were. They're discontented. And I think some of them are going to have been badly burnt, is what I'm thinking. Badly burnt by other churches, right? I think they're going to come from churches that have badly burnt them, where they've been abused, spiritual abuse, authoritarian leadership, wacky doctrine, excesses in teaching, or money and wealth. You can imagine all the sorts of things. I think some who have been who are discontented, and also some that have stumbled in these churches, and are no longer going to church right now because they've been I can't remember what the word is, but you know what I mean by stumbled. They've been disheartened. They just think, oh, forget the church, it's a joke, look what happened to me. I got a feeling, and I think there's thousands out there, by the way, in London, Christians that not always the church's fault or other Christians' fault. Sometimes it's their sort of like false understanding. Somebody once said, I think it was me actually, if you are I've forgotten the word, not disheartened, discouraged, disenchanted with the church. If you're, I can't remember what it is, so I can't remember the word. If it comes back to me, I'll say it. But people that have been stumbled over the church and think that the church is wrong and they don't want anything to do it, I think some of them are going to come our way. And so we're also going to get people that are a little, aren't ready-made off the shelf, stick them in our different teams to serve. We're going to get people that are going to come that are a bit wounded and discouraged and had bad experiences. And I believe that, these people will come and they'll find a place where they'll be healed through love and watched over, and that they will become healed, and then they will become strong too. Let me just show you the second psalm as well, David. Psalm 57, to the tune of Do Not Destroy. I don't know what that tune was like. Of David, a miktam this time, when he had fled from Saul into the cave. Have mercy on me, my God, have mercy on me. For in you I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to the God Most High, to God who vindicates me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends forth his love and his faithfulness. I'm in the midst of lions. I'm forced to dwell amongst ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They spread a net for me, my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul, awake, harp and lyre. I will be awakened. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over the earth. So you can see he's still struggling there. He still knows that there's people out to get him, and he's not in the palace yet. But there's a bit more hope, a bit more victory, a bit more strength. He's awakening himself and getting ready. Well, they worked, and they became a band of brothers, if I can put it that way. And David formed these men, and the discontented became the envisioned and the faithful, and the debtors who had taken from others were ready to give, even to chance their own lives to get David a cup of water from the fountain in Jerusalem, risk their life. And so God bonded these men, and they became healed and they became strong, and they saw that God had a purpose for them, and they left their own grumblings and all those things that were preventing them from being everything that God wanted them to be. And then they became mighty men. And I'm not going to go through everything to do with mighty men. I'm just going to show you. And you see this in 1 Chronicles 11 and 1 Chronicles 12. You see, David becomes king over Israel. Finally, they've left the cave, and he's become king. 1 Chronicles 11. All Israel came together to David at Hebron and said, "We are your flesh and blood. In the past, even while Saul was king, you were the one who led Israel on military campaigns. And the Lord your God said to you, you will shepherd my people and will become their ruler." And then verse 4, David and all Israelites marched into Jerusalem. They captured the city, they captured Zion. And verse 7, David takes up residence in the fortress, and it was called the City of David, and he built up around it from the terraces to the surrounding wall, while Joab restored the rest of the city, and David became more and more powerful because the Lord was with him. And then, I won't go into it, but then you've got these wonderful passages, David's mighty men, or David's mighty warriors, and you've got these chiefs, and they gave his kingship strong support to extend it over the whole land. And this is the list of the David's mighty warriors. And it's a beautiful list, and some of the things that they did. And then look, here is the roll call. You know, the majority of these men were the discontented, the debtors, the unhappy. And now look at them in the roll call. And then when you move to 1 Chronicles 12, it doesn't stop. It's still talking about these men and others that now joined the core team. And look, there was multiplication. From Judah, 6,800, from Simeon, 7,100, from Levi, 4,600, from Ephraim, 20,000, from Manasseh, 18,000, from Naphtali, 37,000, from Zebulon, 50,000, from Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, 120,000. How amazing. You know, I think you can see the parallels. God needed 400 men to form a strong core, a strong team. And out of that, he would fulfill his promises. You know, remember Gideon's army? God can save with the few or many. But then this core got to the place where multiplication took place, where more and more people did it. But it was always based on the strength of this core. We know that in church, 20% of the people do 80% of the work, the 20-80 or the 80-20 principle. And so, you know, what God is doing and has been doing and is doing, perhaps, is forming us in the cave of Adullam, although things are blessed and good. So I'm not saying it's all darkness. You take the parallels where you make it fit, but God has got a wonderful core of people in Emmanuel, and has for many years, and now he's adding more to us, and some of them are choice ready to go straight into the battle, and others are going to take time to be formed in discipleship, loved, healed, and cared. And as that happens, we're going to get stronger and stronger and bigger in our core. And then who knows, in the mind of the Lord, what might happen like that. But I just wanted to share with you this sort of story as perhaps a paradigm of hope for us and for others. And to know that, you know, being in a cave isn't always bad. Because if they'd never been in that cave, they wouldn't have been strong together. They wouldn't have been loyal together. If they'd never been in that cave, none of them, including David, would be able to handle the type of anointing and the type of things that God wanted to do with them. Anyway, I hope that's food for thought. Thank you, Pastor Pete.